Nintendo has managed to create so many familiar faces over the years, such as Mario and Link, and even now Animal Crossing residents are becoming more popular than ever.
With their most recent console, however, there's one recognizable figure who seems to have gotten the short end of the stick this time around, and that is the lovable little ball of joy, Kirby. But while the poor guy hasn't gotten the best Switch lineup, by no means does that mean his series is on a decline. Kirby has remained one of Nintendo's greatest and certainly one of their cutest mascots over the years, and he's not going anywhere. Just like any big name at Nintendo, over the past few decades, Kirby has had a lot of mainstream games, but also a fair bit of spin-offs. In fact, I'd argue that the Kirby series is the company's most experimental franchise outside of Super Mario, of course. With the online multiplayers Kirby Fighters 2 and Super Kirby Clash being the most recent of these experimental games, many may forget or may not have known in the first place that Kirby's initial debut in a spin-off was in the 1993 title Kirby's Pinball Land. While I haven't played this title myself, in order to not upset any enjoyers of said game, I'll trust that it's a joy to experience, but I'm here today to talk about the next logical step after a series tackles something as bold as pinball: golf. In 1994, Kirby's Dream Course, initially developed without any sign of Kirby and known only as Special T-Shot, released to Japan, and came to the Americas a few months later in early 1995.
The premise? Golf, but with gimmicks based on the Kirby series. It may sound odd, bland, confusing, or whatever else, but to me, this is still one of my favorite Nintendo spin-offs to date.
The main objective is simple enough. Use Kirby to knock out enemies on any given obstacle course. The final enemy left standing becomes the hole. Put Kirby in. It's a very simple idea, but it's taken up a notch with the implementation of curb shots, lob shots, a power meter, bouncing, and many other complex options to move Kirby about. For such an old game, the manipulation of physics and maneuverability this title offers is quite impressive. On top of this, the game even has a two-player versus mode, which, while sharing the same basic premise as single player, differs in some minor ways. All of these things are great and already provide the basis for a unique and fun take on golf despite being on such an old console, but we haven't even broken the surface of what makes this title so great of a spin-off. The true depth of this game is present within, well, its Kirby-based gimmicks, all the copy abilities, enemies, and obstacles that appear in its many courses, so let's talk about those.
Firstly, I think it's only fair to start with what has been the main focus of nearly every Kirby game since the little guy came to be: copy abilities.
Kirby's Dream Course contains 10 different copy abilities which can be attained by hitting certain enemies. Naturally, Flamers award the burning ability, Chilies give out freeze, Rockies give out stone, and so on. There's also the Transformer enemy, only present in multiplayer, who gives the player that strikes it a randomly selected ability. Carefully examining the enemies in a line of fire and utilizing the abilities they give can provide an extreme advantage, but to do that, it's probably helpful to know what each ability actually does, and how they alter the gameplay. All the abilities present here are also recycled from Kirby's Adventure, and while their concept is largely the same, they've been altered to fit in with the unique playstyle of Dream Course. For example, in the former title, the burning ability allows Kirby to launch forward as a fiery projectile, and in Kirby's Dream Course the same thing happens, except Kirby maintains his momentum after the move has ended, allowing him to cover far distances, but also potentially throwing him from the course if used haphazardly. Burning, like most of the abilities I'll be mentioning, can also be used to displace damage or even steal a turn from a rival in multiplayer mode. The next ability, Freeze, well, it freezes Kirby, allowing him to slide gracefully across both ground and water. An opponent struck by Freeze will also lose their next turn. It's essentially a more mellow, safer variant of Burning. High Jump is next, and it also does exactly what's expected of it. The ability is used to jump over anything potentially in the player's way. It can be used after rolling on the ground for a while to regain momentum, or can be used in union with a fly shot to launch even further into the air if need be. Next in line is arguably one of the most useful abilities, Needle, as it allows the player to stop almost instantaneously. It's also the only means by which to halt one's movement on a slope as well. Not only can Needle be used to stop Kirby in his tracks wherever necessary, but it can also provide a rather helpful means of both defense and offense in multiplayer. Strategically deploy Kirby's needles to either hurt your opponent immensely or to prevent them from knocking you away from your goal. Parasol is the next ability, and it's essentially a less helpful version of Needle, as it does allow the player to lose all of their momentum, though less instantaneously. And while it does work in mid-air, Kirby will float to the ground in an awkward manner which can only be controlled to a minor extent, making it an overall much less precise ability, which is also lacking the offensive and defensive aspects many others have. Spark is a rather simple one, not modifying Kirby's movement at all, but making up for it by being the most offensive ability capable of defeating Wispy Woods and Krakos, two very disruptive enemies that you'll be hearing more about soon. Stone is largely a less damaging copy of Needle, except with the ability to roll down slopes rather than stop on them. The next ability is easily the most unreliable, yet also potentially one of the most helpful. Tornado allows Kirby to spin around for a few seconds before losing momentum. This movement can be very fast, erratic, and hard to control, as he'll ricochet off of just about anything, but it can also be useful for plowing through lots of enemies at once. UFO is the second to last ability, and it's just as broken as in every other game, allowing Kirby to hover in a straight line for a while. During this time, the player can turn their character 90 degrees at a time, essentially allowing full, easily controlled access to the entire course for a brief period, at the cost of the ability being a one-time use only. Wheel is the last ability present within this game, and it can be the most dangerous if not very meticulously utilized. The ability launches Kirby in a straight line at top speed and won't stop until one of two conditions are met. Kirby flies off the map, or runs into a wall. In the latter scenario, he'll lose all momentum, which can be extremely helpful, but again, extremely risky. Some of these abilities are undoubtedly more useful than others, but they all help to add variety and layers of complexity to an already entertaining game. With a carefully planned shot, a player can cross a massive gap with the high jump ability, or stop right on top of the hole with Stone. You can even use one ability to gain another and then use that one. The possibilities here are quite impressive, and these copy abilities make up the vast majority of why this game is so impressive to me.
They're not the only factors to this amazing game, however. Every game has its gimmicks and obstacles, and this one certainly has a lot of those to talk about as well.
It's obvious at this point that there are many different course layouts within this game, and that's a good thing. But what really makes them stand out is their hazards, obstacles, gimmicks, whatever you want to call them. Once again, this game shocked me with how many of these course hazards it has. There's obviously the sand and thick grass present within, real golf, and bodies of water here and there which can either be skipped over or sunken into, but that's not even scratching the surface. For starters, there are a few enemies who serve as obstacles, such as the two mentioned before, Wispy Woods, who does nothing other than block shots, and Krako, who can electrocute the player if they invade his territory at the wrong time, but there are also obstacles which are embedded into the courses themselves, such as turntables, which can disrupt Kirby's course of movement, but can also be turned on and off via certain switches, pits of spikes that force the player into thinking up some clever, albeit dangerous shots, and trampolines, which do exactly what trampolines are supposed to do. Certain levels also have warps, conveyor belts, dash panels, and directional panels, all of which change either Kirby's direction, velocity, or both. There are some other minor gimmicks and obstacles here and there, but the last one I'd like to talk about is this damn thing. The Sun and Moon switch, only present in multiplayer. Once pressed, it will switch the number of points each player has acquired and can be used up to 3 times. This damn thing is in the same league as the blue shell from Mario Kart and Chance Time from Mario Party. You can do all the hard work of gathering points only for your opponent to stroll on up to this thing and reverse every little bit of it. You can knock them out and hit the switch again, but risk having them activated a 3rd time, in which case you're essentially screwed for the rest of the course. It's a pretty crazy gimmick, but just like all the others, adds to a game already filled with more than enough variety.
It might seem as though I've covered everything this game has to offer, but there are 2 minor things I'd still like to talk about.
Firstly, this game has bosses. Well, a singular boss, Robo DDD, who, while not providing much of a challenge, is certainly an interesting concept. Though what I really want to talk about is what follows that fight. Upon completing the game's campaign, the player can begin unlocking more challenging variants of every course, both single player and multiplayer. These stages retain their old layouts, but with different enemy and hazard placements. Sure, they're not changed much, but the fact that they were implemented to begin with, despite really not being needed, makes me appreciate this game that much more.
As someone whose extent of golfing experience is a single trip to Topgolf, which did not go well at all, this little title is quite great to me.
Kirby's Dream Course had so many unique controls and gimmicks for its time, and is even more complex than some of Nintendo's recent spin-offs. I'd go to consider this one of the timelessly enjoyable games on the same level as Super Mario RPG and A Link to the Past. From the complicated physics required to all the copy abilities and even extra stages, I'm still shocked that so much is packed into a seemingly simple spin-off. To me, Kirby's Dream Course will always be one of those games that provides a nice waste of time, whether while challenging your friends or simply playing alone. Thank you all so much for watching. Did I mention the yellow Kirby present in multiplayers named Kirby?